We've all heard about efforts to bring our airspace and air traffic services infrastructure into the 21st century and update procedures and equipment that in some cases is older than I am. And so you got to know that's really, really old. As it goes by many names. Nextgen in the US, Cesar in Europe, and modernizing the airspace in Canada. But whatever it's called, it's critical to the continued safe operation of aircraft worldwide. It's also really hard, really complex, and really expensive. So I'd like to turn the microphone over to Captain Peter Black, Chairman of ALPA's President's Committee for Remote Operations, to lead us through the discussion on how those efforts are progressing in North America. Captain Black, please introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, panel members, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, and those of you joining us online. My name is Peter Black. I have the privilege of being the chairman, or serve as chairman, of ALPA's President's Committee for Remote Operations, as Chuck said. This committee focuses on enhancing the safety of airline operations in remote areas where communications, navigation, and surveillance may not exist or have very limited capability. Our primary focus is directly related to airspace modernization and implementation of programs that have the potential to provide a higher level of safety and efficiency over remote areas. Examples of such areas include northern Canada, Alaska, the polar region, and oceanic airspace. The current ground-based system of radar, voice communications, VORs, and yes, those NDBs still, was designed in the 1960s. At the time, communication, navigation, and surveillance technologies were limited and less mature than they are today. Through the next decades, air travel became more frequent, the price of fuel increased, and air traffic systems globally reached maximum capacity. As a result, air navigation service providers, or ANSPs, worldwide began modernizing their systems through programs such as Nextgen and Cesar. These programs leverage advancements in GPS technology and position navigation and timing systems, as well as real-time digital data communications, weather sensing and prediction systems, air navigation systems, and other technologies to safely and efficiently expand system capacity. Globally, air navigation service providers are focused on putting into practice these new advancements, improving efficiencies, and modernizing aging infrastructure. The global airspace structure is constantly evolving. Together, along with the ANSPs, regulators, the airlines, and labor, are making the most of advancements in efficient communication, navigation, and surveillance infrastructure. Of key importance is the harmonization of data exchange. All these elements come together to help the system evolve to meet the needs of the aviation community. This morning, our distinguished panelists from regulatory and commercial agencies are here to discuss next-gen advancements and other ongoing modernization of North American airspace. We'll discuss where we are today, the way forward, the impacts that modernization efforts have on our industry, and the lessons that can be learned along the way. So please join me in welcoming from the FAA, Ms. Pam Whitley. Pam is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Nextgen. Beside Pam is Mr. Larry Lachance, the Vice President of Operations for NAV Canada. Representing the Airline Pilots Association, Captain Rip Torn, Chairman of ALPA's Air Traffic Services Group. Mr. Don Thoma is the CEO of Aireon. And also from the FAA, Mr. Mark Steinbicker, Acting Assistant Manager, Flight Technologies and Procedures Division. We'll begin our discussion this morning with remarks from each panel member, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. We'll start with Ms. Pam Whitley, the FAA's Deputy Assistant Administrator for Nextgen. Pam, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you, Captain, for the invitation. It is my pleasure to talk to the community every chance I get, and I'd like to start by just talking about some of the progress that we've made with Nextgen. And when I say we, I think it's we as a community, not we the FAA, because it's definitely been a joint venture between government and industry. So we thank you for your support. But we are at a place now where we have modernized the automation infrastructure. We're making great progress when it comes to communications. We have tests going on today with data communication systems that are going very well in both Newark and in Memphis. And we have a new IP addressable voice communication system. So when we talk about communications, navigation and automation being the core of aviation, the FAA has made great strides in modernizing that infrastructure. That's important to the community because it now allows us to do a lot of the advanced things that we've been talking about for many years. It has a huge impact on how we move to performance-based navigation. So we like to make sure the community understands that while we've been working on this for a while, a lot of the initial work was to get a platform that allowed us to get into a digital environment and to do some of the advanced things that we've been talking about. We've also done a lot of work on performance-based navigation, working on the airspace piece of that, and as well as the avionics required to support some of the advanced capabilities. We continue to work with the community both domestically and internationally on that. Just last year, we published the first version of a harmonization report jointly between the U.S. and CESAR. And it was, I think, a remarkable effort to actually be able to demonstrate and document on paper the work that we've been doing and the commitment to continue that work. We've done quite a few activities with ICAO. We continue to be on the forefront of developing standards, both for the exchange of information and for avionics, and we are very committed to that. The administrator of the FAA has made global harmonization and global leadership one of his 4 key initiatives for his administration. So we have a lot of attention on our commitment to the work that we're doing globally. We've been able to do demonstration activities. Just last September, we demonstrated the ability to exchange information across different service providers. So the work that we're doing in the U.S., we continue to share that information globally. We appreciate the partnership with this community and across the globe as we continue to move things forward. So we think we're in an exciting place in aviation. And what I'd like to do a little later is just talk about how some of the things that we have on the burner will actually be visible to the pilot and change the pilot's experience going forward. So thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you, Pam. Next, we have Mr. Larry Lachance, the Vice President of Operations for NAV Canada. Larry?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the invitation. This is our second opportunity to talk to you folks about what we're doing in Canada when it comes to implementation and modernization of our system. I'd like to use 2 examples, and we talked a bit in the prep period for us what we should talk about. And the 2 examples I'll bring forward is one is the ground-based ADS-B and CPDLC implementation. And before I go on the ADS-B, I'd like to contextualize it a bit more from a Canadian perspective when it comes to implementation of either ground-based equipment or any type of modification to the ATM system. As you may know, we're not in a mandate kind of environment in Canada. Every time I do international presentation, I always refer as Canadian as the green beret type of person, where we mediate our way through implementation in a extensive dialogue with the community. And ADS-B is a very good example of that. When we first started thinking about ADS-B implementation in Canada, we were really looking at some of the areas where we didn't have coverage at all and selected the Hudson Bay area. And Hudson Bay, for those of you who are not really familiar, it's about 900 nautical miles from the north to south and 500 nautical miles from east to west as far as an area is concerned, where we did not have any surveillance capability. So given the fact that we did not have and still do not have a mandate of ADS-B in Canada, that we needed to find a way to introduce and implement this system. And so we have what we call priority handling. And basically, if you think about priority handling, a way of looking at priority handling is being able to mediate all kind of environment onboard equipage, and different type of requests. So we first embarked into this, started the dialogue with you folks. I know some of you folks were involved in this room about how we were going to implement this. And at the end of the day, we started with about 40% equipage that was flying in this area. Today, it's in the range of 85%. And the rule was, if you're not equipped and we still can accommodate your profile, we would give it to you. So that would imply that we had to convince our control staff to operate in the mixed mode environment. And they all agreed, but the only reason why they all agreed is that we brought the pilot community with the controllers together. Otherwise, it would not have worked, because the people that were dealing with this environment on a daily basis knew all the issues that needed to be solved. So today, it's a great implementation, great success, and even today, it's still on a priority handling purpose way of dealing with it. The other one I wanted to share with you was CPDLC. Again, CPDLC, I haven't seen Rich, but we tap into one of your best-known CPDLC expert really early in the stage of where we were thinking about implementing CPDLC in a high-level domestic within the Canadian airspace. And based on the feedback we got, based on the information we got, we started the implementation of CPDLC. But right in the early stage of the implementation, it became obvious that there was a mix-up on the sequence of the implementation. And our customers, you folks, came back to us and said, you need to readjust the implementation, which facility you're going to go first. And we did so. So we readapted the environment based on the feedback we got. And today, again, if you're talking about CPDLC implementation in Canada, I can say, based on what I'm getting worldwide, it's a real success, full-blown success. We started in the early stage of it with about 3,000 contacts a month. The last data I checked this morning were in the range of 150,000 connection on a monthly basis. And it's fantastic, both from a pilot perspective and from an ATC perspective. I'll leave it at that for now. I just wanted to show some of the examples, and we'll talk about the lesson learned later on and what we've learned in the process. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Larry. All right, Captain Rip Torn. Rip's the chair of ALPA's Air Traffic Services Group. Rip.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address this body of I consider to be global experts in the field of safety, and my fellow members of the industry as well. Just want to give a brief background of what ALPA has been doing in the world of Nextgen. I've been involved quite a while with this project. Starting in 2005, Captain Dwayne Worth had set up a presidential committee on the National Airspace Modernization Committee. And I bounced into that committee for a while when it was still in existence. And the mission at that point was pretty much work with the FAA, work with the industry stakeholders, to try to get an idea of where we're heading and how this is going to affect us in our profession. As this has gone through a maturation process, about 3 years ago, we dissolved that committee. We've taken the work projects that we were working on there and seeded it into the different technical committees that we currently are operating through. So it's not exclusive to the ATS group. We have the ADO group involved in a lot of this work, AGE, environment. It touches almost every technical aspect of the work that we're doing here at ALPA. I remember when I first heard about it, Captain Terry Hansen, for those who've been around for a long time and have gray hair like me, was telling me about this incredible concept. It was almost like text messaging, which was kind of new at the time. Turned out to be the CPDLC, or the fact they don't need a radar to know where you're at. And aircraft are using its GPS signal to figure out where you are and broadcast it everywhere. It's evolved quite rapidly, not as rapidly as some of us would like it to happen, but I also heard that this is not unlike living in a house and having to rebuild a brand new house inside of your existing house while you're living in it. So it's quite challenging when you look at it that way, but the real challenges, I think, are not in the technology that's out there. That's relatively easy. That's some smart engineers, some good requirements, working together with the users, building the boxes and making it happen. Where our challenges are is in the human side of these things. And as pilots, our main point of the stakeholder is we are where all of this comes together. All of the technology, all of the procedures, all of the regulations. It all happens on the flight deck, whether we're on the ground or whether we're in the air, whether we're in the US or Canada or flying over to Europe or somewhere in China. So we gave it some thought a few years ago and came up with some guiding principles for all of our members as we're involved in this process going forward. First and foremost, our biggest concern is safety. All the stuff that we're putting on the airplane has a huge potential to increase the safety of our daily operation. There are a lot of things that weren't even considered 20 years ago that is possible today. And one of the specific examples many years ago in Alaska, there was a demonstration project with the ADS-B program. And there was one of the equipped aircraft that was flying out into the remote regions. And they had no real change in rules on the way they currently operated, only now they had this nice cockpit display of traffic information on there. They got a little bit of training with it, and ADS-B flight following from Anchorage Center 300 miles away. And they were down scud running and trying to get into the little remote fields out there. One of the aircraft got into a snow flurry, lost sight of the ground, clipped a hilltop, and fortunately it was the right angle that everybody survived in there, but it was at night, and it was in a snowstorm in the wintertime. Now, this navigation and surveillance product was there, and the controller had enough foresight to think, okay, this plane's overdue, where could it be? In the past, you know, you're not going to launch a search and rescue operation in the middle of the night, especially in a snowy area. But he goes, you know, every 30 seconds we got an update on that position. They went back to the last known position. They did launch a rescue helicopter out there. They saved the pilot and the passengers' lives that night. So some of the unintended consequences and benefits we're going to get, safety is one of them. There's some great things that can happen out there. But one of the other things we need to keep in mind is we're implementing these things. The solutions need to be pilot-centric, not engineer-centric. Controllers have the role in this as well, but you know, what's in it for us? It has to be part of the big system in there, but it needs to be usable for us. It needs to be friendly for us. We don't need to do 15 steps to increase our workload and complexity. And that in turn gets us into the human factors. Finally, we need to have this, I'm really excited to hear the harmonization, a global standard on these things. We can't afford to have a different way of operating here in our region versus when, you know, so many of us now fly international operations, either south of the border or east and west over the oceans and up to our northern neighbors. So it all needs to be harmonized in there. So it's a very complex issue when you look at that. It's not, like I said, building the boxes and installing them, but how do we make this work? How do all these pieces fit together to continue a safe and efficient operation for all of us? Unfortunately, we're also working through IFALPA. I'm the chair of the IFALPA Air Traffic Services Committee, and we have a parallel type operation going within the world of ICAO and within our technical committees there. So the work that we do here directly translates into an international venue, as well as what happens there comes back. We benefit here on a domestic level. So we also work with some of our stakeholders directly, with the controllers especially, with NATCA, and then at the international level with IFATCA, the International Federation of Air Traffic Control Associations. So we have a great staff of our engineering and air safety professionals that keep things going on a day-to-day basis. We have a lot of meetings, a lot of different committees that are happening, RTCA special committees, especially where we're involved in writing the technical standards, trying to get involved in some of the implementation teams, with the Datacom implementation team specifically. We're a little short of volunteers right now, as many of you all know, that with the majors hiring, we've lost a lot of the regional pilots in the meantime that had become subject matter experts. But we're continuing the process and we're rebuilding as well. So with that, I'm just very proud of the support that's been going on, proud of the cooperation that we're able to do with our stakeholders. And it's a long process, but there is progress being made, I'm very happy to say, and looking forward to continue on with this endeavor. So thank you.
Next, Mr. Don Thoma. Don is the CEO of Aireon. Don, over to you.
Great, thank you, Peter. And thanks for inviting me to speak on the panel today. I've had the opportunity to speak to some of the members, to Keith and Mark and Chris before to provide an update on what we're doing with space-based ADS-B, but I look forward to the panel discussion and certainly the questions from the floor. For those of you who aren't familiar with Aireon, Aireon is deploying a network of space-based ADS-B receivers on the Iridium's follow-on constellation starting later this year, so that by the end of 2017, we'll have a complete global ADS-B surveillance system to support air traffic management. So it's really allowing or enabling the capability that we enjoy here in the U.S. with a complete ADS-B coverage everywhere in the world, including over the oceans and parts of the world that are say, less surveilled. So one of our key objectives on the program is certainly to provide that consistent capability, just ADS-B, the same ADS-B capability, consistently across the globe, especially in places that don't have adequate surveillance. So in the brief time I have to talk, I wanted to cover really three topics. First, we've talking about implementing Nextgen, and I want to talk about how a commercial company is leveraging a significant amount of investment that's being made across multiple aspects, both government and industry. Second, talk about the way that we're doing it, and that is through a very close collaboration and partnership with all the stakeholders in the aviation industry. And then third, to highlight really the focus on our deployment of this system is around the benefits it can provide to all the stakeholders in the aviation industry. So, first, why does a commercial company step up and say, we're going to deploy a ADS-B surveillance system? And when we put the program together, we really saw the confluence of events of significant amount of investment that was being made across multiple stakeholders. As you know, from the FAA's perspective, from Canada's perspective, from other places, Australia, et cetera, making large investments in deploying ADS-B surveillance systems. Obviously, you as the airlines have been making significant investments in equipage and are continuing to do that to enable an ADS-B surveillance capability. Iridium was in the process of deploying a $3 billion upgrade to their satellite network that would enable a platform to provide a global surveillance capability. And we saw that all those three things coming together really around the same time in the 2018-2020 time period in a way that would benefit all of them. So first, Iridium offered up capability on each of their satellites to put another sensor, if you will. And in the analysis of that and in the discussions with the aviation industry, we found that putting an ADS-B receiver fit very nicely on the Iridium network in that it provided complete coverage, full global coverage over the oceans, over the poles, in providing a real-time communications backbone to get that information to a controller screen in a time frame that enables safe application for surveillance. So the combination of all that investment, it really is enabling a capability that really is applied on a global basis in a way that is very consistent without requiring things like additional change in equipage on airplanes, potentially enabling things like common procedures across airspace that currently isn't operated in that manner. So with that as the backbone or the fundamental infrastructure that we're talking about, we had to think of how does a commercial company provide a capability like this that was really the domain of air navigation service providers, not commercial entities in that case. So that's really where we saw the need to have very strong partnership. First, the major investors in the company itself are air navigation service providers, NAV Canada, the Irish Aviation Authority, Naviair of Denmark, and ENAV of Italy. We've been working with the FAA since 2011 on a collaborative process for the development of the design, of the development and test and validation of the system. As we start working with other countries and regions around the world, we invite all the stakeholders to participate in that. For example, since 2012, we've had or 2013, excuse me, we've had an MOA with IATA where we formed a space-based ADS-B advisory committee by which we have airline participation as well as ANSP participation to come together on a quarterly basis to really provide transparency into how we're deploying the system, to get input and feedback on how to deploy the system, and coordinate it on a regional basis. As we begin working with regional ANSPs around the world, one of the first things that we do, similar things to what we're doing within the US and within Canada, pull together workshops of all the appropriate stakeholders, the airlines, the pilots, the controllers, as well as the regulators, to discuss if you had real-time surveillance in your airspace, what would you do differently? And how could it enable that capability? So we found that as a very strong pillar of how a commercial company can move into a space, as I said, that's typically the domain of government entities, and do it in a way that provides benefits to all, which leads to the third point. We've really focused this effort on delivering benefits, right? Because a system like this can only be sold to one organization, right? To the air navigation service provider in that case. So if we don't provide benefits to the stakeholders that use that airspace, they don't have to buy it. There's no need to buy it because they certainly provide safe operations in most cases across the board. So we really focused on the benefits to the airlines because they're the ultimate users of the airspace in terms of new operations. I'm sure at some point in the conversation, Larry can describe very specifically what the plans are for the North Atlantic, for the use of this capability and the fuel savings that's enabled by that. But also in working with the ANSPs, finding that when they're going into their CapEx cycle on upgrading radars or replacing radars, this can provide them an extra layer of surveillance that may allow them to not have to make costly investments, especially in very remote locations. And then last but not least, certainly looking at the other benefits from a safety perspective, certainly as Rip talked about, having a common set of capabilities applied around the globe is certainly much easier from a training and safety perspective, but also the impacts from an environmental perspective on reduced fuel burn, reduced greenhouse gas, et cetera. So in closing on the opening remarks, again, I think what we've tried to do was take a capability that was to somewhat degree opportunistic, leveraging investments that were already being made, providing a capability that can be used and be developed with the input of all the stakeholders in the aviation industry, and then focusing on where we can provide benefits to each of those stakeholders. So I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to the discussions during the panel.
Okay, thanks, Don. And last but not least, Mr. Mark Steinbicker Mark is the FAA's Acting Assistant Manager of Flight Technologies and Procedures Division. Mark?
All right, good morning. And thanks to ALPA for this opportunity, and congratulations on hopefully another successful Air Safety Forum. Appreciate the invitation to come and talk about Nextgen and some of the successes and the challenges. And I'd encourage, I don't know, Pamela, we have a booth out front, I believe, that has some Some additional information, I'm going to primarily focus on the navigation domain, but there are various materials out there, and I think we have one handy fold-out that discusses various types of technologies and operations, everything from enhanced flight vision systems to ADS-B, what we're doing with data communications from an aircraft and operator perspective, and actually having specific timelines and maturity levels associated with those technologies. For navigation, I wanted to highlight some of the current activities. I think Pam will probably talk about some of those things, but over the last several months, we've had a concerted effort to update our navigation strategy, and specifically our strategy for performance-based navigation. Over the last decade or more, we have worked very hard with the implementation of performance-based navigation across the United States, and in fact, it reaches back in the 1990s, growing out of some efforts from the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, and other efforts converged. And I think the thing that has struck me and a number of other people, that here we are in 2015, which is hard to even believe. We're in 2015, at least it is for me. The amount of progress that we've made over the last 10 years. We talked about, there's been various analogies, building the house within a house. The other one is changing the tires in other parts as the car is going down the road without stopping. It's been difficult. We've had a tremendous amount of success. We've talked, I think the other panel members talked about collaboration. That's been a big key to our success. We've had challenges in every area. We've had challenges on the technical side, pilot controller phraseology, charting, approval mechanisms, and we've been able to work through the vast majority of those things and find success. ALPA's been there, I believe, all along the way. The other thing is that here we are, 10 years on. Back when we had the 2006, we had a 2004, 2003, 2004 roadmap for performance navigation, performance-based navigation, and now we're updating that, the 2006 version. And we're taking account of the successes, but going forward, I guess 3 main themes pop out, and we'll continue the modernization in the interest of safety, access, capacity, efficiency, all of those things. Because we're now entering the midterm, as it was described back in the 2006 version, we've completed those other things. Now these things stand out. One is there's I think, increased emphasis on prioritization. How do we connect national initiatives with regional and local initiatives, and even international initiatives? How do we make those hard choices that, to a certain extent, up till now, we've made choices, but among all stakeholder community groups, all the disciplines, what's really important going forward? What is our strategy? Because some of those choices are going to be, we're going to go this direction, but not that direction. I think prioritization, our administrators talked about this a number of times. It's important for us to be able to do that, to be able to make some of those choices, given our scarce resources. What do we actually want to achieve over the next 5, 10, 15 years? The next theme ties in a bit with that. Prioritization, there's a rationalization. Using the house analogy, when you build a new house, when you do the retrofit, the renovation, you don't keep 3 kitchen sinks. At least I don't think so. Somewhere in your house you have multiple sinks. We have a variety of users operating at communities in the United States, and we want to address those users and those needs. And yet, if you look at the number of instrument flight procedures we have in the United States, we have a tremendous amount. All of those things come at some cost. Operators have to manage databases. We have to maintain those things. And so I think there's a real effort to rationalize and understand what are the operations we need for not only Atlanta, but Paducah, if you're familiar with, given the range, within the lower 48, Alaska, and territories as well, what do we need going forward? Because we're now at a point where, given the range of operations, I think from a pilot controller perspective, having that range of operations adds a complexity, and at the pilot level, there's this complexity that is being felt, that there's a variety of operations out there, and how can we manage that? How can we rationalize that? And that extends across navigation. As someone mentioned previously, we still have NDB procedures out there. Did I mention it's 2015? But there are users out there that have an interest in that, and so we need to be sensitive to that. But going forward, is there a time when we can get away from that? Once again, going back to, I think, one of our broad strategies, we want vertically guided approaches to every runway end we can put one in. We've been largely successful, but going forward, we want to maximize that. So eliminating 2D procedures and having more 3D procedures, for example. The last point is, I think, going forward with this strategy, which has been socialized at the Nextgen Advisory Committee level and will be worked over the next couple months with our Performance-Based Operations Aviation Rulemaking Committee, PARC. That's a lengthy acronym. The integration elements, once again, entering what was formerly the midterm, how do we bring together, and it's not a novel concept, how do we bring together comm, nav, and surveillance and take advantage of those things and then integrate some of the advances we've had on our ground automation side, the ATM piece, bringing those elements together. I think there's tremendous opportunities. We've talked about data communications. How can we design some of these instrument flight procedures, departures and arrivals, and take advantage of those things and draw together the technologies and all the other elements to maximize the benefits? Those are the opportunities that stand, I think, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, especially over the next 5 years. What do we need to do to pull that together? There are challenges along the way. We mentioned the phraseology piece. It seems like a minor thing. It's not. It's tremendously important from a pilot controller perspective. The technical piece is important. There are pieces of the technology that need to be addressed along the way. So I expect we'll continue to work that, once again, in a collaborative fashion and find solutions for those things. And having a strategy will help, I think, all of us better understand what direction we're going. The last point I want to emphasize, and it's under all of this, the modernization efforts, is we want to maintain or improve our system resilience. Sometimes that's viewed in the context of using GPS and how do we encourage resilience. I think it goes both ways. We have conventional navigation where performance-based navigation complements that. And we have other conventional legacy systems that complement. We need to make sure we have a resilient system, not only in terms of technology, but also from a pilot controller perspective. So if we have a failure, we're able to have that elegant fail down into something else and understand. It's a big challenge. I do take, once again, take account of the success we've had in various areas, oceanic. There are other efforts going on right now in the North Atlantic. We've done tremendous things in the oceanic areas for arrivals, departures, and on the approach side. And hopefully we can leverage that success going forward, applying some of those lessons learned to this new strategy that we're developing over the next few months. So with that, back to you.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. Before we go to the floor and take your questions, both here and also the folks online, I sort of have a general question for all the panelists. Technological advances have impacts beyond just one nation's airspace. How has the FAA, NAV Canada, and Aireon worked together to implement the introduction of these new technologies, such as ADS-B, while maintaining this high degree of harmonization and data exchange that's so important? Pam.
So I'll start. Just to give you an example, we have a facility in Daytona Beach, New Jersey. It's a Nextgen test bed. And we use that facility to bring companies in to get access to FAA systems to do demonstrations. I mentioned last year we did a demonstration that we titled Mini Global, but we had several ANSPs around the globe to include Europe, Japan, and some other countries. And we were able to exchange real-time information about aircraft position as aircraft cross boundaries. So you had ANSPs actually transferring aircraft using digital information, and it really cut down on the voice communication. What that allowed us to do was to really have a seamless integration of an aircraft, changing boundaries coming into the U.S., using digital information and cutting down on the voice congestion. So we've been able to work with, through ICAO, on standards that we're now using to exchange information in a global environment. We had a system we invested in that we call SWIM, System-Wide Information Management, And that now is an infrastructure where we're now putting real-time information, aeronautical information, weather information, aircraft position information. And as we look into the future, we'll be able to have a way for the aircraft to access real-time information, for example, weather information or aeronautical information, using that platform and data communications. So we've been working really on standards, using those standards to promote demonstration activities, and really beginning to do real-time tests on how these things will work in the operation.
Okay, great. Larry?
Well, I said it earlier. In our case, there's always this immediate dialogue with the users of the system, our customers, and really bringing the subject matter expert together. I think that's the only way we've found so far that we have, some successes on a going forward basis. It's not because, you're managing a program that you know about all the details or the daily environment that people are operating in. And we found when we bring the pilots and the controllers, the engineers together, whenever we're starting an initiative, it's kind of allowing, the best example is like you have it in the States here, is Apple. I mean, Apple have constructed their success by talking continuously and being connected with the people that are using their system daily. So it's kind of that format that we have, and reporting back to them on a regular basis. Again, in the case of ADSB in Hudson Bay on the East Coast or south of Greenland, we were continuously, like almost on a monthly basis, reporting on some of the progress, having the flexibility to readapt, while you're implementing the program. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, the real success is talk to the people that are in their environment on a daily basis.
Great. We'll get back to that. Don?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, because it's one that we've been working on quite substantially. Everybody thinks of aviation as a global industry, and I think you more than anybody know that that's not necessarily the case. Regionally, or even within a country, things can be incredibly different in terms of how operations are put in place, how technology is implemented. And as our teams have gone around and working with various ANSPs in Asia, in Africa, it becomes very apparent they may even have the label of the high-end ATM system, but it may not be in operation, or half or even more of the capability is not enabled in that place. So what we've learned, kind of building on what Larry said, is that you can't look at the world as one homogeneous industry, or the way the technology is applied in a similar way. So what we've tried to do is create, as I mentioned before, these regional workshops. For example, the one that probably a lot of people are familiar with is the North Atlantic, but that's a very well-run organization. It's got the FAA and NAV Canada and NATS and other organizations that are very familiar with a high-density oceanic traffic area, that have a very clear way that they work together to improve services, to improve safety and capabilities. It's not as well developed, at least we've found, in other parts of the world. So, for example, in Asia, we're working with Singapore, who obviously is a hub in that region, and they have a lot of interest in how to help build the capabilities of their neighboring ANSPs up to support some of the traffic coming into Singapore. So in that case, we've been working with them on putting together workshops that bring in the stakeholders, as Larry mentioned, the airlines, pilots, the controllers, as well as the ANSPs, into the room to determine how can they function better with not just surveillance capability, but other capabilities like communications and even in data sharing, as Pam mentioned. And for example, to take a little tangent on that side, one of the things that they see from a system that isn't a proprietary system of a given ANSP is that it enables data sharing. ADSB is an open standard. Aircraft squid out the location and other information on the aircraft. And a lot of the problems that we've seen in the Asia-Pac region of the difficulty in sharing data, especially radar data, kind of goes away if there's a neutral source for sharing data for air traffic flow management. So it's those kind of collaborations that you see between not only the stakeholders, but also the stakeholders in multiple countries in a region that bring out ideas of how to use the technology and capabilities for the betterment of all.
Okay. Larry.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Don is saying, and what Rip mentioned earlier. What's in it for us? And if we were looking, I've been in this business for 40 years, and if we were looking for the environment that would allow kind of harmonization, as we are all hoping for, and I'm still hoping for it, having global harmonization. Satellite ADS-B is potentially that golden nugget, where you can fly anywhere in the world being surveyed, and depending on the communication structure and the ATM structure, you can have the same application. I mean, to me, I've been, again, in this business quite a long period of time, and that's why we're so excited about this. It will provide at least a conduit to bring this real harmonization that we've been dreaming about continuously. Because I can tell you right now, this is only the beginning from my perspective, and I don't think I'll be in this business that long to see all the benefit of it. But you can picture going forward that each of the aircraft you're going to be flying will become a sensor to provide data among you folks to make sure that you're conducting your flight in the best condition possible. And I cannot express it more that this is the real opportunity, if we put our mind together, to bring this system on board and connecting with you folks to bring the full-blown harmonization.
And Rip, going back to you and the idea of let's try and make this pilot-centric as much as possible. What do you see as being some of the factors that need to be taken into consideration, especially with concerns as Larry and Pam have talked about?
Now that's something that has evolved as I've been involved in this whole process. I went in initially as an expert, subject matter expert with air traffic services things, regulatory, airspace issues, and not being a former controller either, but it was a little bit of a struggle. But a lot of the work that we've been doing has evolved where the human factors and the pilot, the human in the loop is either shown itself to be a strong point or a weak point in the implementation of some of these things. We have a lot of ways of mitigating those, specifically training. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a dichotomy, depending on how you write the requirements to do what you want to do. And in a simplified version, you write the requirements, give it to the engineers. You want me to do X, Y, and Z? Okay, I can do that. Here's a box, make it happen. Give it back to the person to make it happen. And now I'm doing 15 steps on something that used to just take me one. And by the way, you get no training on the way. The ideal way to design this, and this is where we are trying to really be involved from the outset in the RTCA process specifically and other bodies, is working with the engineers, working with defining the requirements and the performance specifications to get something ideally, it's like your iPhone, your cell phone. How many people here in the room don't have a cell phone? Okay. How many of y'all have ever opened an instruction manual and read how to operate your cell phone? There's a few out here, but very few, and I'm one of the ones that don't do that. That's the ideal. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to, that's when we say human-centric. It should take a minimal amount of training in order to carry out a task, in order to safely perform what it is that we need to perform moving our aircraft, people, and cargo safely to our destinations. So that's, when we say pilot-centric, that's what we're focusing on. So that's something that is critical, because as we've talked about all these groups here, there is so much data out there that's flowing in that we have to process into information, either perform a task or pass something back on. And it can be overwhelming. We need to have the right things displayed to us at the right times, and no more. I mean, how many times when you go flying do you have 30 pages of NOTAMs? And over on page 8, there's a specific requirement. This is going on today in a couple areas of the world. Mandatory offset 10 miles west of your route. That's on page 8 of 30 of your NOTAMs. The right information, at the right time, that we can process, that we can then perform safely and efficiently the right actions and continue this whole action within a system and make things happen. So,
Okay. Mark, do you want to weigh in on this? As these are the Flight Technologies and Procedures Division, how do you integrate this?
Well, it's difficult. I think a number of folks have mentioned the technical standards. We're fully engaged with RTCA, UK, with coming up with hopefully harmonized standards where possible, and I think folding in for some of the having that operational viewpoint during the development of technical standards is important. We're also fully engaged with ICAO, not only at ICAO Montreal, but also at the regional groups. I think the difficult thing is, I was just last week up at the Performance-Based Navigation Study Group, and we had some pretty vigorous discussions at the study group, coming up with the global standards and addressing the kind of the global need for all that. It's difficult enough with your own state trying to address the needs, but from a global standpoint, coming up with a baseline and not setting it too low so there's no benefits nor too high, but taking into account that each state, each locality has its own business economic case, has its own safety case to build, has its own level of competencies among the regulators, among the operators, among the controller workforce, all the folks that are involved. That's a difficult thing. I think this area of competency does keep coming up. There is an expectation that you roll something out that people know how to employ it. And it's not only having the standards, it is actually reading the manual. And reading the manual is only half the task. It's actually being able to employ it correctly. I'll equate it to having the building code, and you have the engineer and you have the architect. Both need to work together. And I think there's been a lot of talk over the past several years of how do you fold in not only the technical standards, but the lessons learned along the way, which has gotten a lot of traction. Best practices, good practices, that sort of thing. All of those things go together. And so coming up with, I think we can achieve a high level of harmonization, but then you reach a point where there are perhaps diminishing returns, and some will be leading and advancing, and other ones will be using a standard that some might look at as 10 years old, but still is a very effective tool in that area. So from a global standpoint, trying to affect that and keep account of the range of capabilities worldwide is a difficult task.
Okay.
So, but we should find some mechanism. The difficult thing, I think, this idea of lessons learned and best practices and sharing among the safety community and the ops community, if we can more effectively do that in the future, that'll be magic.
Okay. All right. I'd like to thank all the panelists, obviously. That was great.